Yeah, it's a pleasure to come along and speak to you all tonight. And I noticed in the audience a few good friends and a lot of new faces as well. I'm sure you all all passionate and interested in marine biology, marine conservation, etc. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to be telling you, I expect a lot of you will know already. So apologies for that, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. It's going to be a bit of a whistle stop tour. I've chucked together a load of slides. They're mainly my own photos, I'm proud to say. Um, I'm starting to get really interested in underwater photography, although I'm still a beginner really, but I've been lucky to have seen quite a few interesting things to photograph in the last few years. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the presentation, and we'll have a good chat at the end, and you can ask questions, etc. So just a quick introduction to marine life in our oceans around the Cornish coast. Um, in, a lot of people, when you speak to them about wildlife, because obviously I work at the Wildlife Trust, they think of furry creatures, you know, foxes, badgers, things like that, before they start to sort of consider the fact that actually the majority, well, more than 50% of our species actually are found in the sea. And you know, we've got 4,000 species of plants and animals in our oceans around the UK, and our oceans are home to incredibly beautiful creatures. And in fact, that it's so sad that a lot of these things never get seen by the majority of people living in the UK, and most people's idea of what's out there sadly doesn't include some of these incredible sights. Pink sea fans are a common sight around our coasts, nationally scarce, but around Cornwall and Devon, South Devon as well. We're lucky you don't have to go that deep, but once you're down sort of depths of 18 meters plus, in most places you'll see these beautiful corals. The pink sea fans, a type of Gorgonian coral. But the seas do so much for us, and this is something we're always trying to communicate. You guys know this already, I'm sure, but the photosynthetic capabilities of organisms in the sea are phenomenal. And in fact, they contribute, roughly 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. And the oceans regulate our climate. They're the reason we've got a lovely moist maritime climate down here, sometimes too moist down here in the southwest. They do so much for us. They provide us with resources, seafood, minerals, oil, sand, gravel, and on top of that, they're home to incredible wildlife. And the wildlife trusts, there are 37 of them in the UK, as well as campaigning for better protection for wildlife on land. We have a very strong project focusing in on marine conservation called our Living Seas program. And through the Living Seas program, we're trying to really improve the situation for wildlife. We'd love to see our marine wildlife in the UK thriving, recovering from past abuses that unfortunately, we've chucked at it, and we'd love to see our wildlife adapting as well as best it can to future challenges. And obviously climate change is right up there. It's one of the big problems these days in so many ways. And a lot of what we're doing, though, really is communication and trying to get through to people and trying to make people care, to get away from that kind of idea that there's nothing worth looking after in the sea. And the fact that it is out of sight to so many people is something we're always trying to battle against, and trying to get the word out there is a big part of what we do. So our Living Seas program includes lots of different activities, but yeah, awareness raising, collecting data, and in fact both of these are very key to my job. I mean, a lot of what I'm doing is working with people, although I'm fascinated in animals and plants. It's actually more important these days to be a communicator and a people person, I'd say, in this sort of line of work. And essentially what we're trying to do is open people's eyes, make people appreciate the seas and want to stand up for it when they get an opportunity, to do so. So although we're not kind of, the Wildlife Trusts aren't really a sort of just a campaigning organisation. We don't go in for quite often we won't go in for hard hitting public campaigns that are just about are kind of quite clear, and things like petitions, etc., and things like that are not really what we tend to do. What we tend to do is influence and try and gain support, and then going through by working with, building up good relationships with various organisations, getting involved in consultations, etc., sitting on important sort of meetings where we can really influence in that way is kind of our approach, rather than being purely a campaigning organisation. So there's me in my natural habitat out on the shore, and doing what I love, which is talking to people about wildlife, showing people our incredible rock pool animals, and hopefully getting people enthused. So a bit about me. I mean, Mike sort of mentioned a bit about my background, but I grew up in Falmouth. Very lucky to have been born in Cornwall. My parents were obsessed with sailing. So when I was a kid, spent a lot of time on sailing boats and sailing all around the UK and across the Channel to France and over to the Scillies. My dad had a gaff cutter, Falmouth working boat, which is a traditional oyster fishing boat. So it was quite hairy, some of the experiences I had as a kid. I haven't got great sea legs. So I actually was a lot more interested in what was going on beneath the boat, and I was always trying to get off the thing and get in the sea. And I've carried that through my whole life. And when we were kids, we used to have an aquarium as well. That was a really big part of my childhood. So we used to go out and collect specimens, study them, put them in the aquarium, learn about them, and then release them once they'd lived there for a while. And I from an early age knew I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I kind of ignored lots of grown-ups who tried to persuade me that it wasn't a very sensible career choice. So yeah, it actually isn't a very lucrative career choice. But certainly it's been a career that I've enjoyed so far. So yeah, I started out as a new graduate, unemployed, and so I ended up working as a fisherman for about 6 months. And during that time, I was applying for jobs, and I ended up getting my first job at an aquarium at Weymouth Sea Life Centre. I then did a bit of travelling. I worked there for a year and then travelled around for a bit and visited Australia and Asia, etc. And then came back to Cornwall and ended up working at the Blue Reef Aquarium at Newquay. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you in this talk about sort of how things in my time working in marine biology, how things seem to have been changing. And one of the things that's certainly a fact is that in the southwest here, we've always had a real interesting mixture of warm water species brought to us by the Gulf Stream and these Lusitanian currents. And we also have a lot of cold water species as well. We're really on the sort of boundary line. And over the years at the aquarium, oh my goodness, we got all kinds of interesting things offered to us. And this is one of the best things about working, I think, at Blue Reef, was the phone calls always going, and people tend to phone aquariums, fishermen, etc., tend to ring aquariums assuming that they're going to be interested in something they've caught, which is great. Quite often we weren't able to offer these creatures homes, but it was great to have the records. And some of them we were able to house. The picture at the bottom left was of a big barracuda, which sadly was brought ashore, and we heard about it, but it had died. I don't think we would have been able to offer that one a home. But that was a barracuda, amazing, brought into Cadgwith on the Lizard. We'd get a lot of triggerfish offered us by fishermen, and triggerfish have a habit of going into crab pots. And obviously, this is a warm water species, and it's about as far north really as triggerfish used to come. But interestingly, in recent years, there's been more and more records of triggerfish. It's actually quite an interesting and one that's worth pointing out that when they first showed up, there was a real flurry of records coming into aquariums, coming into the Marine Biology Association, and Actually, Doug as well, Doug Hurdson, who I'm sure some of you know, he's a really great recorder of fish. But as people start to get used to these things and thinking, they sort of after a bit of time goes by, they stop thinking of them as new and interesting. So the records tend to dip off, and that gives a false impression that they might have gone away again. I think with triggerfish, they're still fairly abundant. I have to say though, Keith might be able to answer this as well later when we have our chat. But I have to say personally, I haven't seen that many triggerfish diving. But whether the fishermen are still catching them, I'm not sure. Anyway, triggerfish were being offered to us a lot, and they make great aquarium exhibits. The one in the top, in the centre, is very unusual. This is an oceanic pufferfish. And it's sad, but I haven't got a photo of the actual specimen. This is a photo taken off the internet. But this species is a fascinating species. And the year I started at the aquarium was 2000. And earlier that summer, a chap had knocked on the front doors of the aquarium holding a carrier bag. And in the carrier bag was one of these oceanic puffers. He found it washed up on the beach, as chance would have it, right in front of the aquarium. It was being attacked by seagulls, but it hadn't sustained too much damage, and it lived in the aquarium for about 4 years. So I'm very lucky that I got the chance to sort of look after one of these creatures. And pufferfish really aren't something you'd expect to find in UK waters, but occasionally they get brought up here, I think, by the Gulf Stream. They're an oceanic puffer, so they're kind of beautiful metallic blue on top and really silver underneath. And I only saw this one puff up once. They have to be really, really scared before they do that with it. Yeah, it was quite impressive. So another species that we had a lot of it whilst I was working at the aquarium, brought into us by fishermen, were these slipper lobsters, really strange looking creatures. Again, a more southern species, but not that unusual to find in Cornish waters, as far as I could gather. At least not whilst I was there at the aquarium for the 12 years I worked there. And sponge crabs the same. So that's the bottom right. This is a really interesting crab. It actually has specially modified back legs. So the two pairs of back legs have pinchers, so they can hold onto a lump of sponge, which they'll sort of presumably using their claws, they'll pick it up off the seabed, fashion it into a sort of a useful shape, and then they'll carry that around, and it makes a very lightweight kind of camouflage, I guess, which they can draw forwards to cover up their body for hiding. And they're fascinating creatures. There's been a couple more recent records of sponge crabs, but during sort of the early 2000s, we were being offered quite a few of these by fishermen. So there seemed to be a little sort of flurry of them there. I think we had a period of kind of a few years where early 2000s where the sea seemed to warm up again, and then we had a period where it seemed to cool down a little bit more, and it went a bit quieter on some of the warm water species. And then the one in the middle there is a boarfish, and this is a fascinating fish that lives in the deep sea, off the edge of the continental shelf, but occasionally they will be brought in. And we had one that was found in a rock pool on the south coast down at Prey Sands, and it lived in the aquarium for a few months. And these are fascinating fish as well. Sadly, we discovered the hard way that they are jumpers. So some fish definitely need a lid on their tank, and this is one of them. But yeah, fascinating little creatures, and hugely abundant. At times, the fishermen actually call them Zulus, and the reason for that is a bit like in the film with Michael Caine. They just keep coming over the side apparently as you're drawing in the nets. If you've hit boarfish, you're not going to get one or two. You're going to get 1 or 2,000. So yeah, it was a fascinating place to work, and some great things were brought in. This is another fascinating story. This is a huge crab, a species normally found in very deep water that will scavenge on things that drop down from above, so dead whales, etc. This is called Paramola cuveri, or the box crab, and again, this has a funny set of modified back legs, and that was an amazing sight. It's the largest. It has the largest arm span of any crustacean in European waters. It was found just off the Scillies. And we also had one that was found in Falmouth Bay. So we had two of them whilst I worked at the aquarium. No, whilst I was there, we never saw them use their back legs, but I've recently seen a documentary done, I think it was by the National Geographic Society, that showed these guys in their natural habitat using the gorgonians, the sea fans, as a bit of camouflage in the same way as a sponge crab does. So they'll carry it around on their back, and that was a bit of a eureka moment, because we've been wondering really what those back legs were for. Working in the aquarium, I got to see some other interesting things. I actually had issues with keeping animals in captivity, and I did struggle with that actually a lot. But you did get to see some behaviours that were, would be very hard to observe in the wild. This is lesser dogfish mating. So, sorry, small spotted cat shark. That's the official name. That was pretty amazing. They were in that position for about 20 minutes, and then when the male finally let go and swam off, he had this incredible sort of S shape in his spine, because clearly, sort of his whole back had sort of stiffened up, and it took him a while to sort of straighten out. So that was quite amazing. And another amazing thing was we were bought quite a few turtles, and this is something that is not unheard of actually in the southwest. It is fairly rare, and you're not likely to. You've got to be lucky to spot a turtle, but they do come up here, and again they're brought up here by gales, I guess, in the Gulf Stream. And during the time I worked at Blue Reef Newquay, we had 9 turtles that we managed to successfully rehabilitate. So we had a couple that didn't make it. And in recent years, there hasn't actually been many that have survived. We've had a few strandings of dead ones. But yeah, whilst we were there, we had quite a few loggerhead turtles. We had a couple of Kemp's Ridleys, and both of those died actually. But the loggerhead turtles that came in were mainly either small ones, which are sort of 1 or 2 years old, and presumably because of their size, maybe more at the mercy of currents, or there were large ones that were handicapped in some way. So you can see the picture on the bottom in the middle. That was a really large loggerhead turtle that was missing one fin completely, and it had only half of its other front flipper. And so he was clearly a bad, fairly bad swimmer compared to your average turtle. So they were, presumably brought up here by strong gales, or possibly because they were unwell. But we managed to sort of rehabilitate them with help from specialist vets. We were, in most cases, we had to tube feed them because they were so weak. And eventually, after a few weeks in the aquarium, they'd be fit enough or deemed fit enough to be released. So and they were all taken down to the Canary Islands, and where there's a sea turtle facility, another rehab facility, and they would be checked over and then released back into the sea. So that was a great part of my job that I really thoroughly enjoyed. Also got to see some cool stuff, like managed to breed seahorses, quite a few different species, set up jellyfish tanks, coral tanks. So yeah, it was a really fascinating part of my career, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. And but after doing it for that many years and being in the same building for 12 years, I was ready for a change, and was very lucky to get a job working as a marine awareness officer at Cornwall Wildlife Trust. Another fascination that I was able to really indulge was my fascination for Kefla Pods, and we kept a whole range of different species. We'd rear cuttlefish every year. We kept local octopus, so the curled octopus and the Mediterranean octopus, both species, and we also kept the giant Pacific octopus, and tried out all kinds of things. This one learned how to open a cage to get his food, which was great, by lifting a latch, but he never worked out how to. We could modify it, and he never worked out how to turn a handle to open the cage. So yeah, but it was fascinating watching them. Anyway, so my current job then, working at the Wildlife Trust, has sort of evolved a little bit over the years, and I work on several different projects. And one of the ones that I really get a kick out of is this one called Shore Search, where we train members of the public to run shore surveys on the shore. And the idea is that it really just generates enthusiasm and local support for for protection of our seas, as well as gathering useful data as well for monitoring change and for monitoring the health of our shores. So yeah, it's been great fun, and sort of since getting one of these small waterproof cameras when I started in my job at the Wildlife Trust, I've got more and more interested in underwater photography and rock pool photography, and I'm sure lots of you in the audience are the same. It's great fun. So what's changed on the shore since I've been doing marine biology? This is kind of what I wanted to start with talking about, because I think it is interesting, isn't it, how things, like I said to you earlier, things in Cornwall and Devon are fascinating because of this sort of natural mixing of cold and warm. But I think my feeling is, and people were very sceptical when we first started sort of wondering this, certainly back in the early 2000s, I had people like Dr. Paul Gainey really, really berate me for saying that, that the arrival of some of these warm water species might have something to do with climate change. I get that. One or two individual animals does not make a trend, However, certainly since being at the aquarium, since leaving the aquarium and working and doing this sort of citizen science work on the shore search and sea search diving as well, we are seeing, I think, an increase in prevalence of warm water species. And we're bound to be in an area that fluctuates, aren't we? But overall, at the moment, certainly there seems to be an increase. And I remember when I had that little fish tank as a boy, we used to collect specimens of all different types of rock pool animals and look after them. But I didn't do a proper record. I didn't take photos, obviously, or write stuff down. But I honestly can't remember Montague's crabs or Xanthorhydrophilus, what we call them now. I call them pebble crabs, but I don't think they were that common when I was a kid. But now, if I go to the beach where I grew up, Swampole Beach, and lift a boulder, there'll be 8 or 9 of them under one boulder. So yeah, and lots of other people are sort of agreeing that this is a species. The Montague's crab is a species that appears to be more abundant. Now, sadly, we didn't go out and do targeted crab surveys in a methodical way that could therefore prove or disprove that theory. So it is quite a challenging one to prove. But yeah, we're finding Montague's crabs all around the Cornish coast. They don't like the most exposed sites. They like sites where there's rocks that you can lift. On the shores of South Devon, I'm sure you're getting tons. But they become quite rare as you go up into sort of Dorset. And the interesting thing will be whether that boundary where they're now quite rare, whether in 10 years' time they will be common. That would be really a fascinating place to do some of these studies. This photo is quite an interesting one. This is a Montague's crab that I think is infected with a saculina, a parasitic barnacle. And because you never usually see Montague's crabs with barnacles on them, but if their health is compromised and they're not shedding their shell regularly, I think this is the result, and it may well be due to saculina, although I didn't see an egg mass under the tail. Some of you might have heard of the saculina. It's a really kind of bizarre and quite disgusting creature that is a parasitic barnacle which directly digs into the soft bits of skin on the joints and then takes over the inside of the crab, preventing it from molting. And eventually, you don't see a barnacle, by the way. It's just a network of these little sort of tendrils all growing through the inside of the crab, and eventually it produces a big egg mass under the tail of the crab, which if it's a male crab is kind of freaky. But this guy may well have a saculina infection. But the more typical look is this smooth, hard shell with massive claws. One thing that's interesting is the tips of the claws are not always black, as it says in some books, and certainly in Cornwall they're quite variable. This is quite a pale one. We get quite bright, whole range of different colours: browns, purples, brick reds. And a closely related species, this is the Rizzo's crab. So this is Xanthopilipes, and it has much hairier back legs and a much flatter carapace, and often more interesting colour patterns. And this as well is very common under rock pools, and there's a great example there of the sort of marbly sort of pattern you get and the hairy back legs. So these two species certainly seem to be much, much more abundant these days. Now, how about this one? This is an interesting one. I've got a few of these brought in by a fisherman to the aquarium when I worked there. This is a corrugated crab, Carcinous corrugatus, and it has this back that's fluffy, a bit like a velvet swimming crab, but it feels more like corduroy. It has this sort of these lines across it, and they're really cool. They're a species that really likes to live on our mearl beds, and again, I haven't got any empirical evidence, but it feels to me like these as well are becoming a bit more common. So, fishermen thought this was a real shock to find one of these in his pots a few years back. But, when you go diving on the mearl beds now, you see a lot of them. And my brother-in-law, he's got, just one crab pot that he uses occasionally as a hobby, caught 4 of these the other day. So perhaps these are increasing as well. I'm quite pleased with that shot, the face on the shot of the corrugated crab. And he's living on mearl, so you can see these, we're really lucky in the Fal estuary particularly, and the Helford, to have these large areas of mearl. And mearl, most of you hopefully will know already, is calcified seaweed that grows in sort of this nodular form in some habitats and creates this incredible sort of 3-dimensional matrix, which is home to a whole host of other species, and it's actually a very beautiful habitat to witness, and we're lucky to have it down here in Cornwall. So another species that we've been seeing a few more of as well recently diving. This is a really beautiful small blenny. Goby, sorry. This is a very small goby, about 10 centimeters maximum size, with interesting markings, and this has been identified as a Stevens goby. And looking in the records, Stevens gobies have been pretty scarce, and only a small number of records. It's Keith can tell you it was named after someone from the MBA. Is that right, Keith? I think that's right. First recorded in Plymouth Sound, but it seems to be becoming pretty common in the Fal these days as well, and Falmouth Bay. Another species that we're seeing more of, and again, this was one that was first recorded, as far as I'm aware, or first seen in large numbers in the Plymouth Sound. This has now started becoming more common in the Fal as well, and this is called a variable blenny, also known as the ringneck blenny, and it actually looks quite tropical. It's a bit like a sort of a more tropical version of a tompot blenny with more finer tentacles, and it's named variable blenny is because quite often you'll come across a jet black one, and I believe those are the males. And the first one of these I saw was on a wreck out off the Manacles, and it was jet black, and I was really excited. But this one was found last year when we did some surveys on the mearl bed, and this is their preferred habitat for laying eggs. This is a whelk egg, but they also love laying eggs in bottles, glass bottles, and really, really cool. And we're certainly this is one that seems to be increasing in numbers. Now, I've got a friend, Shannon, who's a really excellent underwater photographer. And this photo shows you, I think, why some people call them a ringneck blenny. But unless you get that sort of full-on face shot like that, it's very hard to see. I suppose if you had one pickled in a jar, you'd see the lines under the neck more easily, and maybe that's why they gave it that name. But yeah, this photo does show it really well. And another, I couldn't miss this fella out because this has been really, really striking, really noticeable. So this little guy is a warm water hermit crab, and I expect lots of you have seen these already. This is Klebeneris Erythropus, but up until 2016, these were absent from UK coasts. And they've come back in a big. They've colonised in a big way. And a really interesting paper was published last year, done by Christoph Patterson from the University of Exeter in Falmouth. He's done a lot of analysis looking at tidal flows and looking at the biology of this species, and thinks that their larvae have drifted up a northward current from the coast of Brittany, which is a rare current that sometimes. If the stars align and the current is strong enough at the right time of year, can bring species across the channel. It has an interesting sort of backstory, though, this species. So it was actually here in the 1960s, and it was found by a well-known local naturalist, Nick Tregenza, in Mousehole in, I think it's 60, 69? No, or 64? I can't remember. I'm rubbish.
I've got 1960.
1960, thank you, Keith. Yeah, I'm rubbish at retaining numbers. Apologies if I get any more numbers wrong. But yeah, these so it was back then, it had a different scientific name. It was called Klebeneris Erythropus. And, like a misanthropic person, it was good at it wanted to hide away. And I guess that was why it was given that name. Because the interesting thing about one of these guys is when you pick up a shell with one of these in, they'll hide, won't they, right back in the shell, so you can't see them at all. Unlike ordinary hermit crabs, which will use its, Paguirous Bernhardus will use its claw as a front door. These guys don't do that. They carry a slightly oversized shell, and they hide right back in the shell. So yeah, they were here in the 60s, and when the Torrey Canyon oil spill occurred, there wasn't a huge population, but they had clearly survived a cross-channel journey and set up home here. But after the Torrey Canyon, there's a massive impact on our rockpool species. Largely actually probably due to the cleanup and all the detergent, and it wasn't seen in Cornwall then, or Devon. Actually, there were some records in the 60s at Wembury, but it wasn't seen at all until 2016. But now, gosh, they're abundant. I mean, they tend to cluster up, don't they? So they're not widely distributed across the pools. You'll find in some areas there's large numbers. They're gregarious, and I've actually seen them in rock pools in Brittany having real get-togethers on warm days. Really bustling around, getting really excited, and if one of them finds a shell, and jumps in, all the rest of them are all switching shells then for half an hour, and they're fascinating little creatures. When it was first found, we ended up talking to someone from Springwatch about it, and they liked the story, so they ran a little piece with Gillian Burke, filmed down in Falmouth at Castle Beach, which is where we found the first specimen on a shore search survey, and they gave it to a public vote. And the name St. Piran's crab was chosen, and it's quite fitting because obviously St. Piran is our patron saint, and he lived like a hermit. So yeah, that's where the name comes from. So fascinating creature. And actually, although since I left the aquarium, I can't bring myself to set up a fish tank. One day, I might actually set up one just so I can sort of have a good look at these guys and see what they get up to. And there's Gillian Burke from Springwatch talking about them. Interestingly, the two specimens they filmed took me about 6 hours to locate. They made it look like she found them in about 5 minutes. So just a quick another shot just to show you the difference between Clibbenarius and Paguirous Bernhardus. So Paguirous Bernhardus is obviously the common hermit crab, and the quickest and easiest thing to do is look and see if they've got white tips on their claws, and if they've got white tips on their claws, that's the first sign. And the Paguirous Bernhardus also has a much larger right claw, which it uses like a front door, and different coloured eyes, different coloured legs, very different looking. If you pick up one of them, you'll see it, whereas if you pick up a Clibbenarius, you probably will think it's an empty shell. That's another thing. And when I'm out on the shore, what I'm finding now as well is Clibbenarius, they're not that bothered when the tide goes out. They'll just lie where they were left, on top of, quite often looking quite incongruous. There'll be a whole cluster of random shells, all different species of gastropod shell, on a rock or on top of a load of seaweed, and you'll think, what is going on there? That doesn't look very normal. And then you'll realise that there's about 40 of these St. Piran crabs living in a little group. So another thing that's changed since I was a kid. Well, when we were kids, actually, there seemed to be less fish, and that's interesting. I mean, obviously that's not very scientific or very empirical, but there was shoals of sand eels we'd see snorkelling occasionally, but I never saw one of these mega shoals of juvenile sardines. But now every time I'm on the coast, there's a good chance of seeing it. I remember one day I was the Paguirous estuary, we had a little place we used to go on holiday there, right on the water's edge, and I remember seeing the sea literally boiling with small sardines and the mackerel coming in to eat them, and it was quite amazing. And that's a sight that wasn't very common when I was a kid, and certainly, maybe people did see it, but it feels like it's a more common occurrence now. And certainly the fact that there's a commercial fishery for sardines that is growing every year, and the latest studies by the CFAS Peltic survey, where they go out and they do acoustic surveys all around the southwest, is showing a massive biomass of pelagic fish, mainly sardines, also a lot of sprats and anchovies. So the pelagic life seems to have improved. And you can't say this is down to climate change solely, but I think it feels like it's having an influence, like climate change. What we've noticed as well, and I do a lot of work with the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide, looking at stock assessments and assessing the sustainability of fisheries, and we're certainly seeing that northern or cooler water species are faring less well than warmer water species. So species like hake, monkfish, sardines, these are all species that are traditionally targeted by the Spanish and not eaten by the British. They're doing well in our waters now. And species that we would traditionally eat, like cod and herring, etc., these seem to be faring less well. So it's possible that climate change is having a current impact. We naturally get these fluctuations anyway, and they come in decadal cycles, so long-term cycles, and we may get another cooling, in a few years' time. Who knows? But at the moment, we're certainly seeing perhaps the strongest of the warming cycles that we've seen before. And this abundance of pelagic fish is bringing predators, so it's really amazing. I would not have believed you a few years ago if you'd said I saw a bluefin tuna, and I don't think anyone would they? But now it's a regular sight all around our coast, and I'm flabbergasted by that. They were caught around the UK, and there was sport fisheries for them in the North Sea, believe it or not, and off the southwest. But they were absent for a very long time, largely due to overfishing, I expect, but possibly the fact that there wasn't enough pelagic food for them had something to do with that. And now we've got a lot of pelagic food for them in our waters, and there's been some fairly sort of successful management. They've reduced the quotas, and the population appears to have recovered, and sadly they've increased the quotas again, but hopefully the population will continue, and we'll be seeing these for many years to come around our coasts. So striking change, certainly. So like I said, I'm also involved in another citizen science project called Sea Search, which is a brilliant national project set up by the Marine Conservation Society. It's been going now we celebrated the 30th anniversary a couple of years back, and it's been run all around the UK and Ireland by some amazing people. There's a regional coordinator in each area, and in Devon you've got Chris Webb, who's fantastic, and in Cornwall I'm the coordinator. So we've got a great working relationship with the Marine Conservation Society, and the Wildlife Trust in Cornwall benefits really from being involved, and they benefit from having us spending our time organising surveys, etc. And if anyone's interested, please get in touch. So recently we've been getting very excited down here in Falmouth. We've got some great dive sites here, and Falmouth is so nicely sheltered from easterly winds that you can, it's not particularly sheltered from a southerly, but the prevailing southwesterly is very sheltered. So we get out in the bay quite a lot and out in the estuary itself, and we're seeing large numbers of octopus now every winter, which is really exciting. Now, this is a bit of a quandary. This is we're talking about the mixture of warm and cold species. This species has got a very northern distribution. And I always found in the aquarium that they really didn't do well unless you refrigerated the tank. They don't like warm conditions. So this is a bit of a mystery. Why are they doing better at the moment? But there's presumably multiple factors, not just temperature, and perhaps there's more abundant food for the larvae, less competition perhaps for the larvae and improved, or maybe we've just had a one of these octopus swarms, and then we've had them in the past as well. Keith's mentioned it in his talks. In the there's been many years where we've had large influxes of octopuses, and I think that it's perhaps to do with their life cycle, but it's the fact that they produce large numbers of eggs, and if the conditions are right, large numbers will survive. But in recent years, every winter we've been seeing these lovely little curled octopus, and if you visit our Sea Search Cornwall Facebook page, this chap Mike is a master at finding and photographing these, and the guy is like basically a fish. He's underwater all the time. He's a real character, and he's really documenting this big population increase. We've had some. They're amazing, changing colour, beautiful creatures. This one's missing a tentacle, which is interesting. Perhaps it's had a run-in with a predator, or perhaps it's actually passed its reproductive tip of its tentacle to a female and lost a bit more than he bargained for. But yeah, lovely photo, that one. And I can't sort of talk about changes without mentioning this chap. And certainly when I was diving in the 90s in Cornwall, you would never expect to see a crawfish, and you'd see the odd photo being taken occasionally, by really intrepid divers who are going out off West Cornwall, which is where crawfish have always been. But the rest of the southwest, crawfish became incredibly scarce after heavy fishing, really, in the 60s and 70s. These are a valuable species, and no one really expected to see crawfish back again in large numbers. However, they started making a massive comeback, and since 2014, 15, something like that, we've started seeing really large numbers. To begin with, there were babies like this one, often found in boiler tubes on wrecks, but now we're seeing, they've grown each year, and we're seeing multiple size classes, which is interesting. Although there's one very large sort of recruitment, and again, a bit like the little Clibbenarius, I think these have possibly drifted in from further afield, or they've managed to successfully reproduce in our waters, but that seems quite unlikely because the population had dropped so small. But interestingly, Keith actually, in a talk I saw a few weeks ago, showed a photo of one with eggs in Cornish waters. So that bodes well. I'm really hopeful that crawfish are here to stay. And now they're reaching sort of a marketable size. The fishermen, sadly, are actually really cashing in, and they're catching a lot of crawfish. You can't really blame fishermen, in my opinion, who are putting out nets anyway. If they catch them, they want to sell them. It's kind of their nature. And actually, I think really that there should though be better management. And when you speak to individual fishermen, they nearly always agree that there needs to be some sort of management so that the population remains healthy enough that they can make a sustainable long-term living off crawfish, rather than seeing another massive crawfish bonanza that results in overfishing. We wanted to, whenever we spoke to people at the IFCA and and in the government, etc., people were always very quick to say, "Oh, well, the divers really helped wipe out the crawfish, and it wasn't just the fishermen." And that is a fact that divers did collect crawfish. But when you speak to divers these days, the majority of people interested in diving are there because they love wildlife, and very few of them are there because they want to eat it. And actually, we decided to set up to show that actually there was a lot of support for management for crawfish and improved management. We decided to set up a campaign called Hands Off Our Crawfish, where boat operators and dive clubs, etc., would stick up, just educate their friends and ensure that it doesn't really become something that everyone gets back into for the benefit of the crawfish. We wanted the divers to learn about it and to set a good example. And now, when we're talking about management, we can say, yeah, but all these dive boats and all these dive clubs are now, deliberately not taking crawfish because they're grateful to see them back. And really, can we have some more management, please, IFCA? Yeah, we're still waiting, but hopefully we'll get some, and we'll keep putting pressure on. I think in Devon you've actually got a slightly better situation than in Cornwall, because they've got a large MPA. Can't remember the name. off. Is it Start Point? I think it's Start Point, where they're not allowed to land any crawfish in that area. But we don't even have anything like that in Cornwall. We just have minimum landing size, which wasn't enough to protect them in the past. Maybe we need to think about this better and perhaps bring in some maximum landing sizes as well. So we have some large females out there producing large numbers of offspring. That would be a good start. And possibly some protected areas. And exciting sort of news is that we saw another baby. We've had another influx of babies. This one was photographed this winter on the Bizzies, just off Falmouth, and that was only the carapace was only about 1.5 centimetres, so a very young one. And so hopefully they are here to stay. Let's hope so. And that has been a massive change. I remember meeting a chap from Plymouth, actually. He said he really wanted to start breeding crawfish in an aquarium to restock Plymouth Sound. And everyone was like, really? That would never work, and seems a lot of effort. And now it's happened naturally. It's incredible. It really is incredible that they've come back. Another species that I've been working on a lot lately as well, and one that you guys in South Devon are no strangers to at all, is the Pacific oyster. So certainly this has been a big change. I don't remember seeing harboursides with any oysters at all. Native oysters don't like the intertidal very much. You might find the odd one on a very extreme low strand line. They're not normally stuck on man-made structures. They don't seem to favour them. These guys love them, don't they? They love hard surfaces like rocky reefs or sea walls. And their population has massively exploded in recent years. And it's kind of contentious. I mean, these guys, they're non-natives, they're from the Pacific. They have the capability of totally changing the shore. Arguably on a rocky reef, they're not changing as much as they are perhaps on a sediment shore, where you've got sort of one or two settling on small rocks or shells and then eventually clumping together and forming reefs. And I think that's the area where the government, particularly Natural England, are really worried, because they do a lot of work trying to protect these features, these intertidal mudflats, which are potentially going to be overrun in some areas. And we've seen it already. So this is down in Foy. This is an incredible site. But you've got the same in the Yelm and many of your South Devon estuaries as well. And the question is, I mean, obviously it's not black and white. They're not all bad. They're actually providing an ecosystem service. They're providing filtration service. They're providing hiding places for crabs and snails, etc. But what's quite interesting, there's a few students actually that are looking at this now, is like how it's trying to quantify how bad is it, because when they take over mudflats, presumably they're preventing access to infauna like worms. I'm also kind of concerned you could end up with like a monoculture with a less diverse ecosystem potentially. So I'm quite interested in finding out more. And we're not kind of saying they're definitely always bad. One thing for sure is, we're not going to wipe them out. There's so many, and they produce so many larvae. Each a mature Pacific oyster will produce up to 200 million larvae a season, which is crazy. So they are here to stay, and we're likely that we're going to have to manage them though in some areas potentially. And certainly they're very, the harbours are worried. They're very sharp. They can clog up harbours, and they can grow on seawalls, and almost be a hazard just by physically being sharp and growing crusts on seawalls, etc. But yeah, interesting one, and quite contentious. And obviously the Wildlife Trust haven't been pointing any fingers, like where they were brought here for aquaculture. But whether this mass sort of colonisation is anyone's fault, we don't believe it's really worth going into. We actually think that at the end of the day it's happened, and that's kind of a bit counterproductive. We kind of just really need to learn more and work out if we're going to need to manage them and how. But they've gone feral on many other places in the world, and they're feral on the French coast. So again, some of the larvae could could have come from there, but equally that the larvae could have travelled around here, and one of the places they could have come from is aquaculture. But yeah, it's probably a bit, you can't, again, it's a bit like the fishermen earlier. The fishermen don't want the fishermen actually that you speak to don't want to wipe out crawfish. They'd rather crawfish were properly managed, and actually aquaculturists are the same. They would like to make a living, but they're kind of being told what to do by the powers that be in the government and the people who bring in sort of legislation. And actually, it's kind of arguably less the farmers' fault and more the powers that be's fault for perhaps not controlling this population explosion. But yeah, very difficult. Okay, and then moving on, what else is changing? Well, certainly when we're out rock pooling and when we're out diving, we're seeing a proliferation of non-native species, and you guys will have seen lots of these. So Pom-Pom Weed, it was only about when I started at the Wildlife Trust 2012, that's the first time I saw it, and I'm not sure if anyone in the audience has got any more information on when they first started seeing it, but I remember seeing small amounts of it that first year, not really knowing what it was, and only learning about it the next year and realising, crikey, it's everywhere. And this is what it looks like up close. You can really see the spines. Another species that's really proliferated in the fowl is this one, devil's tongueweed, and it feels slimy as anything. There it's pictured with a nice Montague's crab taken a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, it's really, really abundant, and I'm not sure if this is going to cause problems to native species. So obviously you don't classify it as an invasive unless it's definitely causing problems, but it certainly is becoming abundant. And interestingly, it's the largest of the red seaweeds. There's a nice picture there of Christine Wood with one. It actually grows several meters in length. And there's Adele who also used to work with me on Shore Search. So yeah, lots of non-native seaweeds turning up. And in South Devon, you've had a lot of this for many years now. But in the fowl, we've only had tiny numbers in our marinas, but we're starting to see this on the shore in rock pools, and I'm seeing it diving a lot. So this is wakame, the Japanese kelp undaria. So yeah, things are changing, it feels to me. And looking at what's happened over the last 10 years that I've worked at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, it's pretty amazing actually, the number of changes we've seen, and who knows what could be next. And really it just sort of highlights how important it is that we have people out there looking and recording and writing things down and sending in data. And we're really grateful because there's only a small number of marine professionals in the county, in the southwest, but there's a lot of the data that we're going on is given us by members of the public, and we're really grateful. We'd really encourage that. So, and if anyone wants to find out more, these are a few of the projects we work on at Cornwall Wildlife Trust. We're only a small team. There's only 3 of us permanent staff, but yeah, we've got a lot going on, and we're very proud of what we achieved. But none of these projects would work without volunteers, so please get in touch if you're interested in finding out more. So there you go. And just one thing, soon we are going to hear, hopefully, from our government about highly protected marine areas. We've been putting in, we've submitted a lot of information on areas we think would make great highly protected marine areas. And for those who don't know already, these are going to be areas where there's a lot more protection than within our current marine conservation zones, many of which have had no real change. These are going to be areas where all activity that can affect the marine life is going to be managed properly. It doesn't mean you're not going to be able to go diving. It doesn't mean you're not going to be able to drive through on a boat or go wildlife watching, etc. But they are going to be a lot more like no-take zones. And we urgently need these. We know from evidence all around the world that these are beneficial. So crikey, let's shout for these and look out for news, because we're hoping that the government are going to announce their first tranche of these. And when they're announced, let's hope there's some in the southwest, and that we can do some great research and prove their benefit and get more. What's really sad is that despite years and years of campaigning, the government have said they're only going to designate 5 in the whole of the UK, but we really need a network of proper protected areas. Our marine conservation zones really protect a very small list of what they call features, which are normally obscure small species that, actually we need whole site protection to gain the maximum benefit from protected areas. So please shout for them. And you can find out more on that link. I'll leave that up on the screen and put it in the chat as well if you want. Which takes you to the Wildlife Trust's page on marine protected areas. So anyway, guys, thank you very much. Hope you found that interesting, and I hope you got some questions. And nice to have the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much.